Some places don't just have a past, they have a memory. Welcome to St. Bridget's, an old church on the edge of Salem, Massachusetts, where the silence is more than empty space. My name is Lucas Vance, and I came here investigating anomalies, but I found myself facing a history that refuses to stay buried. I was given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest place you've ever been inside? What's the creepiest place you've ever been inside? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to step into St. Bridget's, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in this church, the dead don't rest, they record. Let the service begin. The silence in St. Bridget's wasn't empty. It was pregnant, swollen with centuries of unspoken sins, and the rustle of something ancient, turning pages in the dark. It pressed against my eardrums, a physical weight, as I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The air that sighed out to meet me was cold, laden with the perfume of decay. Not of rot, precisely, but of old wood, crumbling plaster, desiccated hymnals, and beneath it all, a faint yet pervasive scent, like scorched paper and old beeswax, the kind of scent that clings to forgotten attics and guilty secrets. My name is Lucas Vance. Once I carried a badge, hunted monsters of the human variety for the Bureau, specializing in pattern crimes, ritualistic offenses, the dark blooms of twisted faith. Now, I hunted different ghosts, the kind that festered in places like this. St. Bridget's on the wooded fringe of Salem, Massachusetts, a town whose very name was a synonym for hysteria and accusation. I was here at the behest of a discreet, well-funded foundation dedicated to investigating, let's call them, anomalous historical sites. Their summons had been cryptic, mentioning unexplained phenomena, local disquiet, and a church with a particularly dark pedigree dating back to the witch trials. With me, a shadow in the dying afternoon light, filtering through the grimy stained glass windows, was Dr. William Ashcroft. The Foundation had insisted on his presence. A renowned ecclesiastical historian, had said, an expert to lend academic credence to whatever mundane explanation we'd inevitably uncover. He was a man in his early 50s, impeccably dressed, with a calm, scholarly demeanor that radiated quiet authority. His eyes, though, behind gold-rimmed spectacles, were a little too keen, a little too understanding of the shadows that clung to places like St. Bridget's. Remarkable preservation, would you agree, Mr. Vance? Ashcroft murmured, his voice a low baritone that barely disturbed the oppressive stillness. The original Puritan austerity, overlaid with later, more Baroque sensibilities, a palimpsest of faith and fear. I grunted a non-committal reply, my gaze sweeping the nave. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light, illuminating rows of dark, unforgiving pews, a towering pulpit draped in a moth-eaten velvet cloth, and at the far end, a massive stone altar. The place felt less like a house of worship, and more like a mausoleum for hope. My past had taught me that faith, when twisted, could birth horrors more profound than any demon. The image of flames, of a small hand reaching out. I pushed it down. That was then. This was now. It was in the cramped, musty confessional booth, tucked away in a shadowed alcove, that I found the first tangible piece of St. Bridget's peculiar welcome. The wood was cold beneath my fingers. As I ran my hand along the underside of the penitent's kneeler, my fingers brushed against something tucked into a shallow, almost invisible recess. A folded piece of brittle, yellowed paper. The handwriting was spidery, faded, as if written by a trembling hand long ago. 3 rules. Again, it seemed every damn haunted locale came with its own esoteric instruction manual for survival. 1. If you see candles lighting themselves at the altar, don't blow them out. Someone is praying for your death. A chill, unrelated to the church's damp, snaked down my spine. Someone, not something. 2. Never open the Bible on the altar. The pages show how each person in town will die, and reading it makes it happen. My gaze flickered towards the massive, leather-bound Bible resting on the distant altar. It seemed to pulse with a faint inner darkness. Superstition, I told myself. Local folklore spun to scare off trespassers. 3. If you see children's drawings on the walls depicting your death, don't erase them. That makes it happen faster. Children's drawings. That was new. And singularly unsettling. Find something of interest, Mr. Vance? Ashcroft's voice, close behind me, made me jump. He had an unnerving ability to move silently. I pocketed the note. Just old dust and older fears, Doctor. But as I turned to leave the confessional, my flashlight beam caught something on the damp, stone wall of the small baptistry alcove just beyond. A faint smudge of color, red-brown, like dried blood. For a horrifying instant, it resolved into a crude stick figure engulfed in flames, its arms outstretched in a silent scream. I blinked, looked again. It was gone. Just a patch of discolored stone. My breath hitched. The scent of scorched paper, sharper now, pricked at my nostrils. The heavy silence of St. Bridget's seemed to deepen, to listen. And I had the distinct chilling impression that something had just taken note of my arrival. The first full day of the investigation began under a sky, the color of a fresh bruise. Salem in autumn had a melancholic beauty, but St. Bridget's, even in daylight, seemed to suck the color from its surroundings. A monochrome cancer on the edge of the whispering woods. Ashcroft, ever the diligent scholar, was already poring over parish records he'd somehow unearthed from a locked vestry, his brow furrowed in concentration. He seemed unfazed by the church's oppressive aura, or perhaps too familiar with it. My first errand was to speak with Martha Rensley. The Foundation had her listed as a former town librarian, now retired and living in a small, cluttered cottage filled with the scent of old books and Earl Grey tea. She was a woman in her late 60s, with bird-like eyes that darted nervously, and a habit of repeating the ends of her sentences. Dan Brigitte's. Oh yes, the old church on the hill. On the hill, she twittered, her hands fluttering like trapped moths. Bad things there, Mr. Vance. Always have been. The old reverends. They weren't always praying to the one you'd think. She spoke of whispers in the night, of shadows that moved against the locked doors, of a hidden history the town preferred to forget. Her tales were rambling, laced with local superstition. Yet, there was a core of genuine fear in her voice that resonated with the cold knot in my own stomach. Later that afternoon, back in the chilling silence of St. Bridget's, the first rule made its presence known. I was examining the massive stone altar, its surface cold and unnaturally smooth. Faint, almost invisible scratches marred its surface, like fingernails dragged across it in agony. Ashcroft was in another part of the church, his quiet humming the only sound. Suddenly, a soft whoosh, then another, and another. The 6 tall beeswax candles in their heavy iron holders on the altar, unlit moments before, now blazed into life. Their flames were unsteady. They leaped and danced with an unnatural, vigorous energy, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed on the chancel walls. The scent of melting wax, heavy and cloying, filled the air. My immediate instinct was to blow them out, a rational response to an irrational event. But the words from that yellowed paper screamed in my mind. Don't blow them out. Someone is praying for your death. A profound coldness washed over me, unrelated to the church's damp chill. It was the chilling certainty of being watched, of being targeted. I could almost feel the weight of an unseen malevolence, focusing its intent upon me. Ashcroft appeared at my elbow, seemingly materializing from the shadows. Fascinating, he murmured, his gaze fixed on the wildly dancing flames. Spontaneous combustion of residual gases from the beeswax, perhaps. Or a cleverly concealed draft. This old place is full of such theatrical tricks, Mr. Vance. His explanation was too smooth, his composure too absolute. There was a flicker in his eyes, something that looked chillingly like satisfaction. That evening, I met Tommy Ridge. He was young, barely out of his teens, with wide, perpetually startled eyes, and headphones permanently clamped over his ears. The Foundation had hired him to set up audio recording equipment, hoping to capture the anomalous vocalizations reported by locals. He looked thoroughly spooked. "It's not right, man," he stammered, handing me a pair of headphones. "This place, it sings to itself when no one's here, and it knows things." He queued up a recording. The initial sound was a low, multi-voiced Gregorian chant, undeniably beautiful but deeply unsettling in its disembodied perfection. Then, woven into the ancient Latin, another voice emerged, higher, clearer, speaking in modern English, reciting what sounded like a eulogy, my eulogy. It detailed my past, my failures, the loss of my family, with an accuracy that made my blood freeze. Then, Tommy's own voice, clear as day, joined the spectral choir, repeating the final, chilling line. "And so he came to St. Bridget's, seeking an end he did not yet understand." Tommy swore he'd never said those words, that his microphone had only picked up the ambient sound. As I handed back the headphones, my hand trembling, Martha Rensley appeared at the church door, looking more agitated than ever. She clutched a small, leather-bound diary, its pages brittle and brown. "Found this, Mr. Vance. Belonged to Reverend Theron from the 1700s. The 1700s. He wrote of a pact with something he called the Archivist, and a book that writes itself." Reverend Theron's diary was a descent into a Puritan's nightmare. The early entries were pious, filled with sermons and damnations. Then the tone shifted. He wrote of St. Bridget's being built on unhallowed ground, of a presence within its stones, an overseer of ends, an archivist of souls. It didn't demand worship, he wrote, only acknowledgement and offerings, not of gold, but of stories, specifically stories of death. The diary spoke of a great leather-bound Bible on the altar, a lexicon of last moments wherein the manner of every soul's demise connected to St. Bridget's would be inscribed. The ink, he hinted, was not always of this world. The pervasive scent of scorched paper and old ink intensified in the church whenever I read from Theron's diary. Several times, I heard a faint, dry rustling, like immense pages turning in an empty room, or the scratch of a quill on dry parchment. Though Ashcroft and I were the only ones present, he dismissed it as rats or the wind. His placid denials were beginning to feel less like skepticism and more like deliberate obfuscation. The great Bible on the altar became an object of morbid fascination. Its dark leather cover seemed to pulse with a faint warmth whenever I drew near, its heavy brass clasps like grim mouths guarding unspeakable secrets. The second rule, never open the Bible on the altar, was a constant, gnawing temptation. What horrors, what truths lay within those forbidden pages. Once, I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold metal of a clasp. "I wouldn't, Mr. Vance." Ashcroft's voice, velvet smooth, startlingly close. He'd approached soundlessly again. Antiquarian Bibles of this vintage are exceptionally fragile. The vellum can crumble at a touch. Best to leave it to the experts, eh? His smile didn't reach his eyes. His intervention felt less like concern for the artifact, and more like a warden guarding a cell door. It was then I first saw Charlotte Holloway clearly. During my initial sweep, I'd glimpsed a smudge of color. Now, she was a distinct, though translucent figure. A girl no older than 12, with lank, dark hair and eyes like pools of ink. She wore a simple, homespun dress, stained with what looked like dark wax or old blood. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me. She simply drew on the damp sacristy walls, using a shard of reddish-brown material. She sketched with an unnerving, focused intensity. Her first drawings were abstract, unsettling swirls and jagged lines. Then, they began to take on vaguely human forms. Tommy Ridge, despite his fear, had become obsessed with capturing definitive proof. He'd set up motion-activated cameras and more sensitive audio gear. The next morning, he didn't show up for our scheduled check-in. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, gripped me. Ashcroft and I searched the church. The silence was heavier than usual. The scent of scorched paper and something else. Something coppery and metallic, almost overpowering near the baptistry. And there he was, or what was left of him, pinned to the cold stone wall of the baptistry. His limbs splayed in a grotesque parody of the crucifixion. Was Tommy. His skin, from his torso and limbs, had been flayed, stretched taut and crudely stitched together to form a large parchment-like sheet. Upon this gruesome canvas, in glistening fresh blood, were inscribed archaic symbols and a single horrifying sentence in Latin. Audivi et non intellexi, I heard, and I did not understand. His headphones were still clamped over his ears, a USB stick clutched in one lifeless hand. Nausea rose in my throat, hot and bitter. Ashcroft merely made a small tutting sound, a clinical detachment that was profoundly inhuman. Before the authorities arrived, before the sterile yellow tape sectioned off another piece of my soul, I took the USB. Later, alone in my sterile motel room, I played the file. It was Tommy's voice, strained, terrified, reading aloud from what sounded like a very old, very specific text. Then, a choked scream, the sound of tearing fabric or flesh, and a final, wet, sibilant whisper, like a page being carefully, deliberately turned. Tommy Ridge's horrific demise stripped away any lingering pretense that St. Bridget's harbored mere superstition. This was active, malevolent, and terrifyingly real. The official investigation, hamstrung by the church's protected status and the sheer bizarreness of the crime, quickly stalled. They called it a ritual killing by an unknown cult. I knew better. This was the Archivist and its human collaborator. The third rule: if you see children's drawings on the walls depicting your death, don't erase them. Now loomed large in my mind. Charlotte Holloway had become a more frequent, more focused presence. The red-brown substance she used to draw now looked unmistakably like dried blood. Her new fresco, taking shape on the wall opposite Tommy's horrifying memorial, was chillingly detailed. It depicted a small, cluttered cottage, much like Martha Rensley's, engulfed in flames. A stick figure with bird-like features was trapped within, arms outstretched. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to scrub it away, to deny its prophetic power, but the rules stayed my hand. I raced to Martha's cottage, Ashcroft following at a more sedate, almost leisurely pace, offering platitudes about not jumping to conclusions. We were too late. Flames, greedy and orange, were already consuming the little house, a column of greasy black smoke clawing at the gray sky. The heat was intense, the roar of the fire a hungry beast. I could hear faint, muffled screams from within. I tried to get closer, to do something, but the inferno was too savage. I was forced back, helpless, the stench of burning wood, books, and something sickeningly sweet, roasting flesh, filling my nostrils. The image of my wife, my daughter, consumed by a different, but no less malevolent, fire seared my mind. The old agony, fresh and raw. Ashcroft placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt less like comfort, and more like a proprietor admiring his handiwork. Tragic, he murmured, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames with an unnatural gleam. Faulty wiring, perhaps. These old houses, numb with grief and a rising cold fury. I returned to St. Bridget's later that night. The air was thick with the reek of burnt offerings. Martha's life, Tommy's sanity. Charlotte was there, in the baptistry, her small spectral form hunched over the wall where Tommy's remains had been. She was drawing again, her movements jerky, almost frantic. This new image was stark, unambiguous. A tall male stick figure, clearly meant to be me, stood before the stone altar of St. Bridget's. Flames, rendered in angry crimson strokes, engulfed him. Beside him, a taller, shadowy figure held aloft an open book, its pages glowing with an unholy light. As I stared, transfixed by my own depicted demise, the scent of burning beeswax intensified, joined by that familiar, acrid tang of scorched paper. And now, unmistakably, the phantom smell of my own flesh charring. A wave of heat washed over me. So real I flinched, though the church remained cold and damp. The drawing seemed to ripple, the flames to dance. My death, foretold, recorded, and waiting. The crude, blood-red depiction of my own immolation seared itself onto my retinas. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a pronouncement, a sentence handed down by an unseen, unspeakable judge. The phantom heat, the smell of my own burning flesh. These were not tricks of a traumatized mind. St. Bridget's was actively trying to familiarize me with my ending. The air grew thick, heavy, like a shroud dipped in incense and old blood. The silence was no longer just weighty. It was predatory, listening for the stutter of my heart, the catch in my breath. My investigation had become a countdown. Every rustle of unseen pages, every flicker of a spectral candle, every new bloody line Charlotte Holloway etched onto the stone was another grain of sand slipping through the hourglass. The diary of Reverend Theron, Martha Rensley's fragmented warnings, Tommy Ridge's final, terrified recording, the impossible precision of the rules. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, inexorable logic. The Archivist wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, nor a demon to be exorcised. It was a process, a mechanism. It didn't cause death. It ratified it once it had been witnessed, read, or acknowledged. It was the ultimate, inescapable bureaucracy of fate. And Ashcroft. Always Ashcroft. His calm, scholarly facade, his too convenient appearances, his subtle, almost imperceptible satisfaction at each unfolding horror. He wasn't an observer. He was a participant, perhaps even the orchestrator. I found him in the chancel, standing before the great stone altar, the forbidden Bible open before him. The candlelight from the self-lit wicks danced wildly, casting his shadow, enlarged and monstrous, upon the towering redos. He wasn't reading, he was admiring. His head was tilted, a faint, contemplative smile on his lips, as if appreciating a masterpiece. "It's quite beautiful in its way, isn't it, Mr. Vance?" he said, without turning. His voice, usually so measured, now held a new resonance, a subtle hum that seemed to harmonize with the church's oppressive silence. The intricate tapestry of endings, each one unique, yet all part of the same grand design, the design you're helping to weave, Ashcroft. I kept my voice level, a feat of will. My hand instinctively went to the heavy steel flashlight on my belt, a pitiful weapon against the forces amassing in this unholy place. He finally turned, and the mask of the benevolent scholar was gone. His eyes, behind the gold-rimmed spectacles, burned with a feverish, triumphant light. "We all serve a purpose, Mr. Vance. Mine is merely to facilitate, to ensure the records are kept accurately. The archivist is a stickler for detail, you see. It requires a..." human Amanuensis, a living quill. You killed Tommy. You orchestrated Martha's death, I stated, the accusation flat and cold. Orchestrated? Ashcroft chuckled, a dry, rasping sound, like stones grinding together. A rather crude term. I simply opened their eyes to what was already written. Tommy heard his own requiem, and in his terror, confirmed its truth. Martha saw her appointed end, and in her defiance hastened it. The rules, Mr. Vance, are not for your protection. They are part of the ritual. Your fear, your attempts to understand your inevitable transgressions, they all feed the narrative. He gestured towards the open Bible. Its pages, illuminated by the frantic candlelight, were not filled with scripture. They were covered in a dense, spidery script, interspersed with crude yet horrifyingly accurate illustrations. I could see Tommy's flayed form, Martha's burning cottage, and there, on a freshly inscribed page, my own fiery demise before this very altar. The ink was a glistening dark crimson, still wet. 25 years ago, Ashcroft continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I was a young, ambitious researcher, much like yourself, drawn to the legends of St. Bridget's. I, too, discovered the rules. I, too, saw my own end inscribed in that very book. He tapped a manicured finger on a faded, almost obscured section of an earlier page. A rather mundane, wasting sickness, as I recall. Unacceptable, but the Archivist, in its magnanimity, offers an alternative. A way to rewrite one's own entry. For a price, of course. The children, I breathed, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Charlotte, the 12 sacrifices Theron's diary had hinted at. Ashcroft's smile widened. A truly terrifying sight. Clever boy. 12 innocent souls, their narratives truncated, their potential transferred. It bought me time, power, the ability to guide the quill. But the ledger must always be balanced. And my own overwritten entry, it's beginning to fade. He looked almost mournful. The Archivist requires a significant final offering to make a new inscription permanent. A soul, fully aware of its fate. One who has seen the truth of this place. One who has wrestled with the rules. His gaze, burning with an unholy fervor, locked onto mine. You, Mr. Vance. You are the final page in my ascension. He lunged, surprisingly fast for a man of his age and build. Not with a weapon, but with his hands outstretched, aiming for my throat, aiming to drag me towards the altar, towards the open, blood-scribed Bible. The church itself seemed to come alive. The church itself seemed to come alive. The scent of burning ink and scorched paper was overpowering. The whispers from the walls rose to a clamorous, multi-voiced chorus, speaking in dead languages, reciting litanies of forgotten deaths. The children's drawings on the wall seemed to writhe, the crimson figures squirming, their silent screams almost audible. Charlotte Holloway stood by the baptistry, her small hand pointing directly at the open Bible on the altar, her dark eyes fixed on me with an unreadable intensity. I sidestepped Ashcroft's lunge, the flashlight a clumsy extension of my arm. He was strong, his grip like iron when he caught my sleeve. We wrestled, a desperate, graceless struggle amidst the looming pews, the oppressive weight of the Archivist's attention pressing down on us. He was chanting now, low and guttural, words in a language that felt like sandpaper on my soul. He was trying to force me to look at the Bible, to read my own fate aloud, to give it the final, vocal ratification it needed. My mind raced. The rules, they weren't just warnings. They were keys, vulnerabilities. If you see candles lighting themselves at the altar, don't blow them out. Someone is praying for your death. Ashcroft was praying for my death, consecrating it. But what if that prayer was disrupted? With a desperate surge of strength, I broke his grip, shoved him back. He stumbled against a pew, his spectacles askew. In that instant, I whirled towards the altar. The 6 candles blazed, their flames licking at the shadows. I took a deep breath, and with all the force in my lungs, I blew. One by one, the flames sputtered, fought, and died, plunging the chancel into a deeper, more profound darkness, lit only by the faint, eerie glow emanating from the pages of the open Bible. Ashcroft let out a strangled cry, not of anger but of pain, as if a vital connection had been severed. The multi-voiced chorus from the walls faltered, dissolving into a confused, discordant babble. The air, for a precious second, felt less charged. But the archivist was not so easily denied. A low growl, like the sound of a vast stone door grinding open, emanated from the altar itself. The pages of the Bible began to riffle, faster and faster, driven by an unseen wind, the crimson script seeming to bleed and reform. Charlotte pointed again, more frantically now, not at the Bible, but at Ashcroft. He was clutching his chest, his face contorted. The earlier faded script on the page had indicated as his original fate, now glowing with a faint, sickly light of its own. The archivist, denied his new sacrifice, was calling in an old debt. Ashcroft crumpled to his knees, a thin wheezing sound escaping his lips. The faint, sickly glow emanating from the Bible page. His page intensified, casting ghoulish shadows on his contorted features. It was as if invisible, ancient claws were reaching out from the blood-scribed vellum, sinking into his very essence. The disruption of his ritual, the extinguishing of the candles meant to consecrate my death, had somehow defaulted the archivist's claim back to its original, long-deferred target. No, not yet. Ashcroft rasped, his hands clawing at his chest as if to physically repel an unseen attacker. The bargain, it must be honored. The church groaned around us, a chorus of stressed timbers and shifting stone. The whispers from the walls, though momentarily confused, were regrouping, a sibilant, hungry tide of sound. The pages of the great Bible on the altar continued their frantic spectral flipping, settling finally on that faded earlier entry detailing Ashcroft's original demise. The wasting sickness, the crimson ink of my own foretold death, though still visible, seemed dimmer now, less vibrant, as if its power had been temporarily suspended. Charlotte Holloway remained by the baptistry, her small, translucent hand no longer pointing, but balled into a fist at her side. Her dark eyes were fixed on Ashcroft, not with malice, but with a profound ancient weariness, perhaps in some way only a child sacrificed to this unholy place could understand. She was witnessing a form of twisted justice. I had a choice: leave Ashcroft to his fate, to the cold, meticulous judgment of the archivist he had so faithfully served, and flee, or the thought, insane and desperate, clawed its way through my fear. If Ashcroft could attempt to rewrite his fate, could I? The archivist dealt in recorded narratives. What if the narrative could be altered at its source? Ignoring Ashcroft's gurgling gasps, I scrambled towards the altar. The Bible lay open, its pages exuding a palpable coldness, the scent of old ink and something akin to ozone. The script describing Ashcroft's wasting sickness pulsed with that sickly luminescence. My own fiery death was still there, a crimson threat, but subservient for now. I needed to act, but how? I couldn't write in the book. I had no ancient knowledge, no sacrificial power. Tarrant's diary had spoken of the archivist acknowledging offerings, of balancing the ledger. My blowing out the candles had disrupted Ashcroft's offering of my life. What if I offered something else? Something to decisively close Ashcroft's account? My eyes fell upon the heavy, ornate silver chalice resting beside the Bible, probably used for communion centuries past. It was tarnished, but solid. An idea, born of desperation, and a half-remembered detail from Theron's frantic scribblings about consecrated vessels and containment, sparked in my mind. With trembling hands, I snatched up the chalice. Ashcroft was writhing on the floor now, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, his skin taking on a gray, almost translucent pallor. The sickly glow from the Bible page was leeching the very life from him. "The Archivist!" I yelled, my voice unnaturally loud in the charged silence. "Takes what is due. This debt is paid." I slammed the heavy silver chalice down, upside down, directly onto the illuminated page describing Ashcroft's wasting sickness. The effect was instantaneous and violent. A soundless shockwave emanated from the Bible, throwing me backwards. The remaining unlit candles on the altar flared into momentary, brilliant, a great rushing sigh, as if the church itself were exhaling a millennia of trapped breath. The whispers from the walls ceased abruptly. The eerie glow from the Bible page, now covered by the chalice, was extinguished, plunging the altar into near-total darkness, save for the weak moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows. Ashcroft let out one final, shuddering sigh, and then lay still. The life, the unholy fervor, had drained from him, leaving behind only the empty, withered husk of a man. His eyes stared blankly at the vaulted ceiling. His own meticulously recorded fate finally, irrevocably, claimed. Charlotte Holloway was gone, as if the closing of Ashcroft's account, the finality of his end, had perhaps granted her some measure of peace or release. The air in the church, while still cold and ancient, felt lighter. Lighter, the oppressive, sentient weight had lifted, replaced by a mere echo of its former menace. The scent of scorched paper and old blood was fading, leaving only the mundane aroma of dust and decay. I cautiously approached the altar. The chalice sat heavy and cold upon the closed Bible page. I didn't dare touch it. I didn't dare open the book to see what, if anything, had changed. My own fiery death, depicted on the baptistry wall, was still there, but it looked faded, the crimson lines less vibrant, like an old scar rather than a fresh wound. The archivist, it seemed, had accepted the payment. Ashcroft's life, finally rendered, had balanced his long outstanding debt. My own fate, for now, was unwritten, or at least unconfirmed. I didn't linger in St. Brigid's. The authorities, when they eventually arrived in response to an anonymous call I made from a burner phone miles away, found only the body of Dr. William Ashcroft, dead from what the coroner would later, perplexedly, rule as causes unknown, consistent with extreme and rapid physiological decline. The great Bible on the altar was closed, the silver chalice resting innocently beside it. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of my struggle. The story of my involvement remained mine alone, a secret written in the cold sweat of terror and the lingering scent of burnt offerings. St. Brigid's was cordoned off, deemed structurally unsound, another decaying relic for Salem's already crowded roster of haunted locales. The foundation that had hired me quietly dissolved its inquiry, their curiosity apparently sated, or perhaps their own private ledger balanced. Life, as it has a grim habit of doing, resumed its relentless mundane rhythm. The searing nightmares of St. Brigid's faded, not into oblivion, but into the dull ache of a chronic, invisible wound. The silence of my small, anonymous apartment was no longer filled with the rustle of spectral pages, but the fear of it never truly left. I found myself scanning old books with a new, irrational apprehension, avoiding places heavy with the weight of history. The drawing of my fiery death on the baptistry wall. I never knew what became of it. I never went back to check. Some horrors are best left undisturbed, their potential unconfirmed. About 6 months later, a small nondescript package arrived at my post office box. No return address. Inside, nestled in plain brown paper, was a small, antique tin of drawing crayons, the kind children might have used a century ago. The colors were muted, save for one. A vibrant, startling crimson, the exact shade of the blood drawings in St. Bridget's. There was no note. I threw them away, of course, deep in a public dumpster, buried beneath bags of refuse. But sometimes, late at night, when the city outside is quiet and the shadows in my room grow long, I think I can smell them, faintly, the waxy, slightly sweet scent of old crayons. And then last week, I was browsing in a dusty second-hand bookstore, a habit I couldn't quite break. I picked up a forgotten volume of local New England folklore, its pages brittle and yellowed. As I idly flipped through it, a loose leaf of paper, clearly not original to the book, slipped out and drifted to the floor. It was a child's drawing, crude but unmistakable. A stick figure, tall, with my messy brown hair, standing before an office building, a speeding bus hurtling towards it. Beneath the drawing, in a small, shaky hand, were two initials. C.H. My blood ran cold. Charlotte Holloway. Still watching, still drawing. Still. Warning. I don't know if the Archivist is truly gone, or merely dormant. I don't know if my fate is my own, or simply deferred, waiting for a new scribe, a new set of rules, a new, unsuspecting reader. The terror of St. Bridget's is that its gospels are not confined to stone walls and ancient Bibles. They are written in the margins of everyday life, in the fearful whispers of folklore, in the innocent scrawls of a child's hand. Perhaps the most horrifying truth is this: the Archivist never truly sleeps. It merely waits for the next story of an ending to be told, for the next page to be turned, for the next unwitting soul to read their own final, unwritten verse. And somewhere, always, a crimson crayon is poised, ready to sketch the inevitable. St. Bridget's holds its secrets close, written in ink that isn't of this world. Lucas Vance learned that some rules are not for protection, but for ritual. The Archivist never truly sleeps. It merely waits for the next story to be told. The ledger is balanced, for now. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate revelation. The twist that proves the Archivist's reach extends far beyond the church walls. The final moments are a terrifying reminder. Fine, what do you think the Archivist truly is? What was the price Ashcroft paid? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it out of St. Bridget's, if your name hasn't been written, then you're already part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some endings are still being written, and the ink is always wet.